Hello, everyone, and good morning. It's my pleasure to introduce you my friend Ekin Olcay. She's an architect and she educated at Politecnico di Milano, both her bachelor and master's degree, and right now she's working on her PhD degree. And
Yes.
Okay. So Ekin's work mainly focuses on the cultural heritage and urban regeneration and with significant projects on preserving collective memory especially. She worked on Istanbul's Balat district. By the way, she's from Antalya, like most of you. And her research and professional practice emphasize innovative strategies for reviving neglecting urban areas. And also, Ekin, as a passionate educator, having taught and mentored students at Politecnico di Milano. Today, she brings her insights to us with her lecture, Endangered Past, Protecting Cultural Heritage. So we're welcoming Ekin. Welcome again. And stage is yours.
Thank you. Good morning. I mean, I have to say, what an introduction. Uh, it's how to say, it's not always, it feels strange to hear from outside. But yes, I've been working on a lot of heritage and collective memory related topics, but these days we're kind of shifting in the research because I mean, I don't know if you know, but there's this programs that the schools are taking and then they're taking the grants, and then Politecnico di Milano currently is getting the excellence award again. So we've been working on the fragility and the fragile contexts, and then I'll be working in the mountains. So we're shifting into the community houses, and then the related links with the fragile context, which in case Trentino region mountains in my case. So this research is shifting completely to a different direction, but learning, of course, what I have been researching for several years. So, before we start, I would like to make sure, I mean, first I'm going to share the screen so you will see the presentation. But I would also like to state that if you guys have any questions at any sorts, I would like this to be more like a dialogue respecting than a lecture, and then you guys will listen. If you have any doubts, questions, or anything that you would like to add, please let me know. In the meanwhile, so
Really,
we
I
can,
can
yes.
try
I
to show
mean, I
you
don't I
in
don't see you
class.
guys. I'm pretty sure you
Yeah.
see me well. I hope so. But if you have anything, please let me know through Gamza or through someone else. Or you can just pop into
Okay, I
the
think
link. Exactly.
it's
Amazing.
yeah, it's more
It's better
exciting.
to see the faces. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Perfect.
Okay, and this is my email address. So if you guys have any further discussion that you would like to do, please send me a message. Okay, so the first image that I would like to show is, I don't know if you guys know about this or see it at any place. No. Okay, this is a very important sculpture by a very famous artist called Arman. It's called Accumulazione Musicale Seduta, which can be translated as the musical accumulation and seating. So Arman is a American artist that was born in France, known for combining the industrial civilization objects and romance in large installations such as this. This is a very large, let's say, sculpture. Uh, and then he turns the sculptures into a new monuments that he repurposes materials completely by adapting them into different forms and shapes, but yet the main idea is always to preserve the main function itself. So this is a sculpture that he did for Triennale, the 15th Triennale. I don't know if you guys heard about it. It's very Italian. I didn't also said that today we're gonna speak about Italian context, and I'm giving all the examples about Italy since I'm living there. I've been experiencing for almost a decade now, for 10 years more or less. And I would like you guys to see that there's this different, let's say, comparison that we can make between, let's say, Italy and then the other European countries, or especially Turkey in that case, we can say, about how to preserve and, let's say, protect the memory of the space. So all the examples you guys will be seeing will be about Italy. It's very normal that you guys don't know or haven't seen it before. I experienced it when I moved here. So if you guys didn't understand anything, please let me know. I'm saying again. So this is a very grand monumental seating. As I said before, it's located in the biggest park of Milano. Uh, it's been there for 50 years, we can say, in a way. And then it's still, of course, there are a lot of dents and problems. For 50 years it's very normal, but then the actual shape is preserved very well, so people are still using even these days. So here you can see a guy is reading his book, which is a very Italian thing to do, I would add. So he used, like I said, he used the chairs with the same function, which to convert them into a new chairs, a new seating areas, but then by preserving the function by seating. And also here that he created this little podium where he inserted little instruments that reflects into, to give the idea for you immediately to capture, okay, this will be a cavea. I'm sure you're all architects, you know what cavea is, but I would like to just say one more time just to make sure that we're on the same page, that it's a term coming from the ancient Greece, used for a semi-cultured seating area in the ancient Greek theaters. So you immediately understand the sensation that you would like to give by preserving completely the old industrial, let's say, materials. This is a preliminary example of the lecture that I would like to give, but I would just like to have this image in your head, that keep in mind that what I meant in the first sentences by the end of the lecture. So going on, as then, let's say, an academic now that we love to suggest books, this is a fact. This book, it was one of the first books that my professor suggested me to read. I don't know if you guys have read. If not, I highly, highly recommend it. It's called The Colai City by Colin Rowe and Fred Cotter. That what the book tells is about, like, it gives a little etiquettes about modernist urban planning, advocating instead of a city as a layer of collage of diverse architectural forms, shapes, and historical references. So they believe that the city is not a one unique form, is not coming by one shape, that there are the layers coming on top of each other all the time. So we cannot just look at one thing and then assume everything has this one kind of specific timeline, which is what I would like to discuss more or less in the lecture today. So this, I would like to ask you, have you ever seen this image before? Any of you? Or discuss with someone else? So it, I don't know, even on Instagram or somewhere. It's a very famous, let's say, architectural drawing. Okay. Uh, so this is one of the images that was being in the book, that it's the book has been written in the 1980s, but then this drawing is by Hans Kohlhoff in 1976. It's called The Project of Analogs, City by Hans Kohlhoff. Um, so, I mean, I don't know if you recognize, but these is not an actual city. This is, let's say, an utopic idea of Hans Kohlhoff's, how the collages of the city that I mentioned here, that merge together and then create the perfect city in his minds. So to give an example, these are all very, let's say, important buildings throughout the history. And for example, this is Uffizi Museum in Florence that you immediately understand by reading the plan of the architecture. Or for example, this is any of the war rings that can be Colosseum, or that can be many others that we can find even in the pyramids of Antalya, that we have a lot of, let's say, stadiums. And then all this architectural, let's say, roads and elements, and then churches that in his head, when they merge, become the perfect city. So we cannot just leave or read by looking at one individual piece and assuming they are coming from the same area, same time. This stays the same. So carrying on. we're going back after a little introduction. I would like to go back by talking about the cultural heritage and what is a cultural heritage. So this is a very, very famous drawing that you can find in the Louvre Museum in Paris. It's a very famous Italian painter called Giovanni Panini. He captured Piazza Navona, a very famous, one of the biggest, let's say, squares in Rome. Very also noticeable by this, even on the plan or even by looking at the architectural forms, that you can immediately understand that which kind of area or which kind of city or which kind of, let's say, place that we're talking about. So going back to cultural heritage, we associate the cultural heritage in our heads with wealth. So the more you have, the more heritage that you have, no? The more architectural forms, the more anything, that the more history that you have, the more wealth you have. This is an immediate thought that in our heads. But in the broadest terms that we can say, heritage is an asset, a property, or money left to someone by a deceased relative. So I'm a year old Turkish. I think it's safe to say the Turkish word. So it's miras kalmak in that sense. Um, and it often immediately in our heads that signifies wealth or fortune passed down within a family or a family member. Similarly, the societies have collected these assets in different forms and shapes, in architectural sense, in art sense, in music sense, in many, many, many different ways, and passed from generations to generations. That's why that we have the countries has very distinctive, specific looks from change different from the other ones. For example, when you see an Italian, let's say, even a pizza you see, or even a pasta, or even I don't know, a church that you see, you immediately associate, I don't know, this with Italy. Or when you see different kind of assets that you immediately associate with different countries, it can be anywhere in the world. So each country has their, each background, let's say ethnicity, country, maybe a wrong word, has their this significance, which we call wealth, that passed down from generations that creates that differentiates between one of them. Um, so cultural heritage, like I said, comparisons with all tangible and also intangible assets, as I just listed before, that values and societies have accumulated over the centuries, over thousands of years. First, let's examine the world of the word itself. The heritage is, like I said, as an asset. It's something passed down from previous generations. So when we speak of cultural heritage, we're not actually directly talking about money or property. Rather, we talk about the culture, the art, the values, the traditions, the history itself. So it creates for the inhabitants, for the citizens, a very unique shared bond in a way that makes us together a society, a population, and a sense of belonging to our community, to our generation itself. It embodies our history, identity, and our connection with the past, present, and its future. So this is a elevation that from a very, very famous building. It's called Tomba Brion by one of the best architects in the world, in my opinion, is Carlos Scarpa. Maybe you guys have seen this in the Star Wars movies or in Dune movies. This is a very famous window that they are always using in the movie scenes, but actually it's a mausoleum. So, so we talk about the tangible cultural heritage, which is something you can see, you can physically experience, and then of course there's the other methods. So in the tangible heritage, but what is it in that sense? It is divided into movable paintings, sculptures, coins, manuscripts, archaeological artifacts, architectural elements, frescoes in that sense that you see, and immovable archaeological sites, historical urban fabrics. That's just, we can count many, many, many examples. All the structures and artifacts that we can see and touch fall under the tangible cultural heritage. So if you can touch it, it's tangible. Let's call it that way. So this, I'm pretty sure, even if you haven't visited, I'm hoping that you will have a chance to see one day. This is the fresco of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel by the painter I think you all know called Michelangelo. It's the creation of the Adam that he painted between 1508 and then 1512. That maybe you see like this, or maybe in most of the, let's say, images that they only propose this portion, that this is the first time that the god and their, let's say, kids are creating the Adam and then giving the life and touching for the first time. So this is another very famous painting. This is not, I don't know how to say, history of art class, but I would like to give little information for all of them. If you guys are interested, I would be more than happy to assist you in the future, let's say, cases of how to read or how to see. But this is another famous drawing. It's called The Birth of Venus. You can find in the Florence in the Uffizi Museum that was created by Sandro Botticelli. You guys probably seen an image like this, or maybe only portion of the Venus itself, or maybe this portion. I'm pretty sure you guys see the whole picture or some portions of it in many, many places. So, uh, besides the tangible cultural heritage, that there's only the immovable, let's call it that way, um, which are the archaeological sites and then the cities and the urban fabric. So this is falls into the natural heritage by the term, and then it includes all the natural sites, significance to historical landscapes. So it can be valleys, it can be plains, it can be canyons, it can be fjords, it can be any kind of geographical format. So here that this is an aerial view of aerial photo, sorry, of Sassi di Matera. It's a famous city here in Italy, that it's very famous, that it's been built thousands of years ago, and then it's been built by completely by a one specific kind of stone. Sassi means a stone that's very local, can be found in the area. So they built the entire city by using that kind of specific stone, and even today that the city is exactly how it is. But I think you guys also know this area. Just go back to, let's say, your own culture, that one of the James Bond's movies, I don't remember which one, but one of the last ones were shot in Sassi di Matera, that they were going with the motorbikes and then with the cars, with like having the cool, let's say, drama in the city. So this is the plan view, the master plan and its landmarks of Sassi di Matera. Even though you don't see the materials, or even though you don't see the stone itself, that when you look at the plan, or when you look at the monuments, or let's say the landmarks, let's call it that way, that you immediately capture that which city, that what are we talking about. But these are not built in the same time, so you can even identify that there's this border. So probably it's a medieval city, because if they have walls, if they have a castle, if they have a church, probably it's been layered and layered through the different times of the history. So again, going to the national, I will be more quicker in this phase. I've been talking way too much in my explanations, but then it's not just about the stones or the city itself. It can be like the valleys. This is a very famous valley in the central middle Italy, called in Tuscany, called Val d'Orcia. Or they can be many other ones, like lakes and mountains and all the locations that you can find. But we're talking about all the things we can see and touch. But does the heritage only tangible? Can it also be an abstraction in that sense? Yes, it can be. Uh, we call them intangible cultural heritage. So, intangible forms of heritage and how they are part of our cultural heritage. This is the question that we have to answer. Because if we cannot touch it or see it or physically experience it, how they are our heritage, in which kind of forms and shapes that they can be our heritage, how that we can reflect this into the next generations. Because when you have, I don't know, this glasses, for example, that if I wore it for 60, 50 years, I don't know, then I pass it to my daughter or my son, and they pass it to their kids, and they pass it to their kids. This become an asset, a heritage in our family that can be represented in a very smaller forms. But imagine if you're a society and if you have this big, let's say, volume, big kind of form that you pass it through, then in that sense, that makes our cultural heritage as a society, because it's not only my value anymore, it's our collective value, collective memory that comes through the faces. So these kind of keywords I would like you guys to keep in mind always in the next step. Then what are we talking about, and then see if it makes more sense each kind of step that we're going through. Um, this image that you guys don't see, but you will see in the next one, it's a very famous vineyard. They're producing this grapes called Müller Thurgau. It's very famous, let's say, white wine production grape that can be not cultivated everywhere, so they have very specific locations. So this is called Vino di Montagna, which means the mountain of wine, a valley in Trentino in the north eastern part of Italy, and a valley called Valicembra. So all of these, as you can maybe slightly identify, has these little, let's say, terraces. They call terrazzamento, which is directly translated as terraces, that leads a kind of protection, but then also have this, I don't want to talk too much details, but it gives the earth to breathe, it gives, enters the water or the sun or the light or the air into the vineyards to cultivate better kind of, let's say, wine production. So this is a close-up picture. There's many forms and ways and methods that you can build. It's very famous in the very north, in the mountains, for agriculture purposes, or in the very, very south of Italy, so not in between central parts. This is a picture from the southern part, from Sicily, that it's a dry stone wall. It's one of the examples of fishbone braiding. Even today in Italy, if you go to these two regions, two areas that I'm talking about, that you can find, let's say, courses, lessons on how to build a dry wall, which comes from thousands of years. I don't know even from when. I don't know if there's a first record of how to build of a dry wall, but then comes from very, very, very historical, let's say, periods. So also, another thing, this picture is a dog and a man, and then holding some sort of a rocky thing. It's called the tartufo hunt, which is the truffles. You know, the type of mushrooms that you can eat that has this very distinctive smell. Um, so, as an Italian culture, they have this truffle hunts for, again, thousands of years into generations, that every people that who's doing this kind of teach their kids on how to hunt. Also, not only kids, also their dogs, because they're the first, let's say, guidance in our senses that they found, and then they bark, so we go there to check if there's a truffle or if they did a good job. But in this case, this boy did a good job. So um as a definition of intangible culture heritage is somewhat challenging term to define exactly. We cannot put the exact words to define it, but they can be classified as living cultures or traditions. Different cultures have unique languages, expressions, customs, histories, and all forms of creating their heritage. Thus, every culture has very distinctive heritage itself, like I said before, that you can differentiate very easily between Italy and Turkey, or with Russia, for example. Above all local languages reflect local biodiversities. In this case, the truffle, for example, the mushroom, creating a sense of belonging and social cohesion. In Turkey, as to give an example, we can share a common language, allowing us to communicate and understand each other very easily, very seamlessly. Um, while dialects exist, I don't know if you guys know what a dialect is. I really want this to be a dialogue, so if you guys have any kind of input, please let me know. So in Turkey, we have accents. No, we have a very distinctive accents that can be found in the very eastern portion, differentiate from the west. The north is different, the center is different. So when people speak, sometimes, not everyone, of course, that we have a common language, one language, but you can differentiate the localization of the person or where they might be coming from. But in Italy, it's, besides there's this accents, which is very strong, that they have this language, I would call it that way, called dialetto, which means a dialect. But in English, it translates slightly different because dialect is also referring the accents. Dialect means that every region in Italy has had their kingdoms before the union of Italy. So they were speaking their own language, even though it's all Italy. For example, Lombardia, which is the Milan where Milano is, or for example, Veneto, where is Venice is, or Lazio, where is the capital of Rome is. They used to be a kingdom, and then they were speaking their own languages. So even today, the dialect, of course, disappearing slightly by slightly, going to the next generations. The younger ones are not learning that well, but they kept it some sort in a way to express their also the heritage, the culture. And then when a dialect, for example, you're speaking Veneto dialect, as a Milanese person, I cannot understand anything, even though I speak Italian. So to give a very funny, let's say, story about this, that we went to this dinner one time in a very northern, a little hamlet in the mountains, where it was 8 people from the same region from Trentino, and then there was me, a Turkish girl who's speaking Italian, nothing dialect at all, and then there's this another professor. She's my professor. Her name is Alisa Tonion. That she's from Bergamo, somewhere in the Lombardia region, but she speaks she's from Bergamo. She's speaking Bergamasco, the dialect. So when they were speaking in dialect, us two, it's not only me as a Turkish didn't understand what they're talking, but also Alicia had no clue what Trentino people were speaking. So they were saying, "Ah, we have two foreigners in our table, so we have to switch into Italian." So it's become completely, let's say, preserved in the sense of even the language that they keep is passing always to the next generations itself. So I've spoken way too much about this. This was, I'm sorry, I don't know why you see it like this, but supposed to be a very vertical picture. But even though by the capture, you guys kind of know Mona Lisa. It's by Leonardo da Vinci, one of the most famous paintings that you can find in the Louvre Museum. So, but the thing is, what I'm saying that the location that they're finding is because it's an Italian painter, an Italian woman painted in Italy, but then being located in France, in a complete different, let's say, country. So the tangible heritage can be individual as well as collective. This is what the message that the backdrop, the message that gave to us. So Mona Lisa, when we talk about the cultural heritage in the sense in Mona Lisa, we generally think of a single society and a community among the members. However, the cultures itself can be separated by the strict boundaries. Artists, writers, scientists, musicians, or whoever that performing any kind of, let's say, heritage form, although from different cultures of eras, influence each other, yet we must not overlook the cultural diversity itself. Take, for instance, the painting here that we see, a portion, I'm sorry, but Mona Lisa. Um, so the question that goes in the back in our heads is that even though it's an Italian painter but located in France, does that makes it's a part of Italian only Italian heritage, or does it make universal? Yes, in some drawings, it's obvious that it become the world, let's say, heritage. But who decides this? It's always a organization, I'm sorry, that is UNESCO. So I won't go into deep details of the organization, foundations, or the communities. UNESCO is a very well-known organization. I'm sure that you heard, all of you. For example, in Turkey, we have a lot of UNESCO Dünya Mirası listesi. And in Turkey, we have a lot of, let's say, assets in UNESCO. So I won't discuss what ICOMOS is. I won't discuss what UNESCO is. But to have a very briefly, let's say, notes on that, this is a picture that where they did the first assembly to, let's say, found the organization in Paris, 1946, where they're, let's say, launching the organization itself. So by UNESCO, it's like UN, it's like United Nations, it means UN. It's an educational, scientific, and cultural organization to expand what UNESCO is. was established by the United Nations 1945. This is the first assembly 1946. Turkey is among within the 20 founding members. So there are founding members, and then there are the adjuncts, let's call it that way, that came afterwards. The Turkey, which is very, I mean, we are all very rich, well, how to say, very rich in terms of the heritage. So of course we have to be one of the founding members. We only have 18 assets in listed in UNESCO World Heritage, but Italy has 58. So there are 40 assets more that listed in Italy, even though by the perimeters, by the square meters, by the altitude, whatever you want to call it that way, Turkey is a lot bigger. Turkey is very, I don't want to talk about the historical times, but let's call it more historical, more layered throughout the history. But we only have 18 assets and Italy has 58. So we have to go back and then question ourselves a little bit in that sense that why do we have 18 and they have 58? We are coming from the same time, same era, same historical, let's say, events, because they preserved and we didn't. Or we preserved, let's say, not in a correct way, not in a correct form. We didn't teach our kids on how to preserve things. So I would like to highlight this one more time again. It's not a lecture. We are a fantastic, incredible country. I'm always say I'm a proud Turk, but we have to say that preserving is not our strong suit, and we have to learn and teach more to the next generations. So this is a painting. Guys, by the way, eğer bir İngilizce'de sorun varsa, Türkçe soru sormak istiyorsanız herhangi bir noktada lütfen çekinmeden Türkçe'de konuşabiliriz, sorabiliriz. Dersin formatı İngilizce olduğu için İngilizce anlatıyorum. Okay. So this is another painting, which is a very, let's say, realistic painting by a very famous painter that I mentioned earlier, Giovanni Pannini. He painted Pantheon, and he painted in 1734. So it's been centuries over. It's been built, I mean, between 98 and 117 after the Christ, so even 1,000 years in advance of this painting that Giovanni Pannini painted. And every day it attracts more than 30,000 visitors. So every day around 30,000 people come in and get out. So imagine the dance, or imagine the harm that those people can give. But today, that when we visit Pantheon, it's exactly the same as it is. They protect it so well, but not only Pantheon, because it's an asset, it's a very big historical and architectural asset over the centuries. But then, even though there's 30,000 visitors, as you can see, it's super full as well. That doesn't harm because they respect their history and their culture. So, where is this picture from? I would like you to make a quick guess. I'm sure all of you will nail. There are gondolas, a canal, a bridge in Italian city, where it can be. Yes. No, sorry, the voice comes very probably later than I anticipated, so I don't hear well. Yes, so it's Venice. That this is a very famous bridge called the Rialto, which means re-elevated in when you translate from Italian to English. So like we said, the preservation is very important, the protection is very important, but then we have to talk about what's in the country. So what threatens, what are the, let's say, threats in terms of denting or ruining the cultural history. So all societies contribute, as we saw in Mona Lisa examples, the world's cultural heritage. For this reason, it is essential, super important to protect the cultural heritage through national laws. It can be through international agreements, as we saw, for example, in UNESCO, and show respect for it. Illegal trafficking in artifacts, looting the archaeological sites, as for example, in our case, just to give an example, that a portion of the Ephesus library is in Turkey, but then the complete interior, for example, is museum in Berlin. So when you see this, it's a very big, let's say, asset that has been gone in our country and then being shown by somewhere else because of the looting. Damage to historical structures that we can add to this list as statues and cause irreversible harm to each country's cultural heritage. So this damage can be classified as several, let's say, subtopics that in that sense we can do climate change and natural disasters, looting, war, neglect, and terrorism, vandalism. I really don't know why in some pictures that you guys see a little, let's say, crooked. Okay. So this is a, let's say, aerial shot, a Google Earth screenshot that I did of the Venice. You know, Venice is an island that Italy is located all the way through the surroundings around, and then connected with a station by a very thin road that has two car lanes, which is these two, and then let's say two or three train lines that one goes and one comes back. And this is the only connection with the island physically with the mainland. So it's all of these little, let's say, gaps are not streets, they are the canals, so they are the water that has been built on stilts. And the only way to transport in Venice, either you walk between these little bridges that it crosses literally everywhere, has to connect throughout the canals. The Rialto, the picture before was this one, the most famous, the biggest one. This one that you guys see in the previous slide. Why I can't go back. This one is is this bridge over here. This one. And we're going to talk a little bit about this square here, and then the other portions of Venice. So this is a painting. It's not a photograph. It's not a picture. It's a painting that, again, a very, very famous Italian painter that goes with the name of Canaletto, but his name is Giovanni Antonio Canal. He is a painter, was born and raised in the Veneto region from Venice, so he devoted himself by doing thousands of, maybe even more that we don't know the record, of oil, let's say, paintings of different portions of Venice. So this is called Il ritorno del Buchinto al Molo del Palazzo Ducale. So this is the main, let's say, the main church, which is San Marco. This is the Doge's Palace. The dukes used to live there. This is the tower, the bell tower, and then these are the welcoming statues. So this square, this, let's say, painting was painted from here looking to this direction. So we're talking about this square over here. So like I said, I'm not going to talk about the history of Venice, which is very, very depth. We need weeks to talk about the history itself. That's very unknown and very mysterious, even today, for many of the archaeologists or many of the, let's say, Italians, let's put it that way. It was first built on 118 islands connected by canals and bridges, and it used to be a very, very powerful kingdom. We, as let's say Turks, the Ottoman Empire during the period was doing very much let's say trades and business and an exchange with the Veneto kingdom. So it was a very, let's say, influence on both senses, that we influence from Veneto, and then the Veneto the kingdom influence from the Ottoman region, Ottoman Empire, very, very much. It was a powerful kingdom, very rich, and power meant, of course, money and wealth. So back then, the city's greatest wealth were laid in art, especially in the opera and the painting. So in their way, because today, for example, when we think that what are the richnesses, we go talk about the I don't know, the super fancy expensive bags or the cars or the clothes that people are wearing. But in Venice, in Veneto, but during the back in the time, the more opera that you go, the more opera that you watch or host, the more, let's say, big parties related to art and artistics and cultures, or the more paintings or the more bigger, let's say, historically important objects that you have, you were more rich and more wealthy. So their focus was not on their how to dress, their focus were mainly on collecting the valuables. Let's call it that way. However, the Venice we know is sinking. No, it's going down. This is a myth that has been told to many, many, many of years. So it's always sinking, always going down. Um, but before I go explain, I would like you to see one video that this painting is from 1729, and then this video that I took a few days ago, I mean last week, that when I mean by preserving, when I mean by saving, this is what I was talking about. So from the same shot, from the same, let's say, point that you see the Doge's Palace is exactly as it is. The San Marco, the basilica in the back, is exactly as it is. The two statues are still being very much seen and very much preserved. The palaces here are exactly as it is, and then the tower is exactly as it is. There's nothing, even a single statue or if a single rock has been changed. The same shot, the same view. This is 2024. This is when Canaletto painted, and even centuries before that, these, let's say, architectural, let's say, heritage were existed. So let's going back to this big myth of a cruise ship image of Venice, that the Venice is sinking. So the Venice is being held completely on these, let's say, wooden stilts that you can find everywhere, that they were built on top of it. But the water level is significantly high, especially in the last years because of the, let's say, what is it? What is the word? Because of the climate crisis. However, the vaporetti, the water buses, the motorbikes, or this big kind of cruise ships, they call the vaporetti, the only method of transport. And this is like their bus. So when you want to go somewhere, you have to take the sea bus, which is in this period, and they stop in the points, and then you get down and then go wherever you want to go. And there's this ongoing debate currently in the Italian media, and Italian, let's say, political, let's say, representatives of how many vaporetti, for example, in a day can operate simultaneously because they create some sort of a wave underneath. And then since it's underneath a mud, the whole earth kind of shakes underneath because there's too much traffic going back and forth, or the big cruise ships, like I put in a picture, are entering and then creates big tectonic, let's say, waves underneath that causes shift and then sinking. So even when you don't physically experience immediately the actions or the acts of these elements, external, let's say, facts, when you have to think of the future, that you have to start acting now in order to preserve that what we would like to give to our kids. Because if it goes like this, maybe in 150, maybe 500, we don't know when, that the Venice will no longer exist, that has been there for thousands and thousands of years. So they call this, I would like to give a little fun fact, which is, let's say, the entertainment portion of the lecture, that the water arises. So the same palace from the sea that you guys saw, the same church, because we saw the image, the painting, and my video from looking like exactly to here. So this is looking to the other direction. But this is supposed to be where people are walking, no? No, because Venice is sinking, so every year there's this high tides, high waves. Usually happens around actually these times in November, when there's a lot of uh high tides during the nights, or when there's a lot of rain or the seasonal change, that Venice actually sinks. So they actually go in the water with their boats or with their what is it called, like their gondolas. And this was a picture from 1966, which is the world's worst has been recorded the highest acqua alta, which is high risen water, which acqua means water, alta means high, so high water in Italian. And the second one was, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. Um, so it has significant, of course, causing problems, increasing the risk of the island rest in mud, and then of course it also increases the problem of the health issues because it's very muddy and very, let's say, dirty. Um, so I will not go into details, but as you can see, even though Italians has their this, let's say, perfect irony and perfect, let's say, comedy in their culture, where that they, even though even the worst case scenarios, they have this routines that they have to perform, which in this sense, the two workers, I don't know what they're working of, probably something related with the water because they came with their gondola. This is a very famous, let's say, Cafe Florian, I think, if I'm not mistaken the name, um, went there to have their morning coffees. And then the guy, as the waiter, is serving the workers their coffees. So again, the same. The guy probably is going to his house because he has to go to run an errand. But in that sense, he's, I don't know what he's doing. The woman is walking on top of the bridge, but then he just doesn't care. He just likes to go home with his suit. So there's this routines that they're also preserving very much in their own formats, that of course it's very easy and very simple for them to teach their kids on how to act on it, because they're not just because something else dramatic happened, they're not forgetting their own, let's say, culture and their own way of living, their own routines. So this is a picture today that I also experienced one day, that I had to wear these high boots and walk in the muddy water, and I was sick for 10 days because it was super dirty. That all of the people, because it's 5 o'clock, so they went there to have their Aperol Spritz, and a guy is walking in the basilica, and then the tourists went there to see the space because probably they didn't know what Acqua Alta was, and then what happened. I'm sure these are not the Venetians. So uh, the ancient Romans, of course, they found the way of to have the most durable concrete. So even sometimes the answers are in our hands, in our palms, but we have to just go back to see what the let's say the resolution is. So continuing by Venice, are you guys bored or are we okay? We can take a little break if you guys want to. We don't have a lot much left in the lecture, but just to give you a little slack. So, we were talking about Venice, we were talking about the history, we were talking about the heritage. So, I would like to continue by saying, again, to a different topic, because we talk about the climate crisis. Uh, Now we're talking about looting. Looting is I mean, as we can see everywhere, that has been happened over the centuries, that every, let's say, country probably experienced it. Every country with a history experienced it. Like I said, the one of the most famously well known, the Ephesus library, in our case in Selçuk, Izmir, has been more or less, the back of is completely moved to the Berlin, to the museum in Berlin. So that's another form of looting. But in this one, in this sense, we're talking about, again, a case in Venice, and the Cavalli di San Marco, which is translated as the horses of San Marco, um, which are the four horses that has been located on the top of the San Marco church, in the square that you guys see, because we're always talking about the same square, which is these ones, these four horses that has been located on the main facade. So these are four. Before going into the word itself, I would like to talk slightly about what is looting as a term. Of course, it's to steal something, to dislocate, to move something. But then in the previous section, we discuss the other problems. But then the looting can be also as a victory momento, which is after the wars, which is the next step that we will discuss. Um, that some of the let's say, objects, artifacts, the elements kept as a memento, that is a recordings from the past or from the war for the victory. So these four horses are very famous. They're the bronze statues, the same material as, for example, the Statue of Liberty in New York. That used to be bronze, which is, of course, the color is more reddish. And then over the times, over the decades that they've been, I mean, decayed, and then the color has been changed into green. So these four bronze horses are the statues of a horse, serves as a protagonist element, which is symbolically can be represented as a chariot used to work the victory parades. You know, when there's this war victories, or where is this, I don't know, the king of a country has been moving around, that there's this big carriage car in the back, and then there is this four horses usually that takes the victory lap. So these four horses are representations of a victory parade. These statues on top of the basilica today are replicas, not the original ones, because the original statues actually were brought from Istanbul. So these statues, firstly known, I don't know who did it, but there's for sure coming from a Byzantine area, Byzantine period, which is there used to be. Today we don't have it. This is an illustration of how, of course, they imagine the golden horn, the Haliç of Istanbul. It used to be, this is the Hagia Sophia, the church that you all know. This used to be the hippodrome, where today there's this Sultan Ahmet Cami is currently being located. So there's this Istanbul University that nearby, and then there used to be this big, let's say, square that we don't see anymore. And then the roads are very Byzantine and very Roman-like. So currently, when you go to Rome, you can see the architectural, let's say, planning, architectural configuration, which is very similar to having this porticos, having this big monumental statues in the middle, or having this big connections where you can see Haussmann Paris style, for example, and the type of the floorings, and then the opens and the courtyards, and then the greenery approach of a very Roman like city. But Byzantine used to be part of the, of course, later turned into Roman Empire. And then this is where where the Istanbul is. This is where Galata is, which is the only settlement in their heads. And then, of course, Nişantaşı, Bebek, all the other places are going through that direction, the very famously known. But this was the main portion of the city. So the horses were actually statues were built for Constantinople, that name currently Istanbul, to the hippodrome that today we don't have. So they've been made by very detailed. I'm skipping the basics, by Greek sculptor Lysippos, and then they were suggested between, I think, 2nd and 3rd century after the Christ. So like 2000 years ago, more or less, just to give a little time frame in our heads. The story is very complex. It's not a history of art class, so I'm skipping all the little details. These four horses, in 1204, the statues were located from Istanbul and brought to Venice, which is on top of the San Marcos Basilica. And they believe that they originally were, of course, in the hippodrome, which is, again, we kind of assume, we're not very sure. But after the Venice, so first Istanbul to Venice, and then after Venice, Napoleon, when he was, let's say, during during his conquerment of the European lands, during the French Revolution in 1797, in the war, Napoleon Bonaparte seized the statues from San Marcos Basilica and then took them to Paris. But however, when the war was ended in Paris, the statues were brought back to Venice, not to Italy, not to Turkey, sorry. They were brought back to Italy because they believe that now the basilica owns the horses. And in Istanbul, it never came back, and then we never have the hippodrome afterwards ever again. So there's this kind of belonging sense that we have to take it into account, that to whom or to which place does the statues truly belong? Can we answer this question? No, we definitely cannot, because it used to be in Istanbul, moved to Venice, and then moved to Paris, and moved back to Venice, that the horses traveled probably more than we all do. But the problem is that these horses become this collective, let's say, central point of all of these cultures, and then they affected very much of all the history, of all the heritage of these three nations that used to unite at some portions, but then they separated completely. But this is a challenging question to answer, because as a part of both individual and shared cultural heritage. So we cannot, like Mona Lisa, for example, we cannot put a pinpoint on which exactly culture that it represents us. Today, currently, these horses are replicas. So on when you go to Venice, when you see the horses, they're not the actual horses. They're not the real ones. These are the replicas. The real ones are being restored inside of a basilica in the under very, let's say, air and light protection, let's say, zone. That Italians are taking good care of it. But today, these are the replica of the horses, the fake horses. So the third level that we would like to speak about, and what damages, what gives harm to the cultural heritage, are the war. This is a picture by Willy Schwartz, a photographer. That was the cover also of the book, but also a picture in the book called Mi amatissimo fratello, Fuga da Milano, which was the series of photographic, let's say, pictures were being placed in the book during the bombing of Milano, which is 1943 and 1945. Um, for the thousands of years work so far, it have has been seized by victory of the trophies of victory, like the horses, or like the any other, let's say, libraries, or any other, let's say, historical importantly artifacts. If they win a war, they collect as a memorabilia, like I said, in the horses. Um, this is one of the reasons why the artifacts today's has been moved from the original locations, and when it comes back to the original state, or the moral or the ethical issues associated with the removing works of art from the forum or rightful places, it has been said that there's this famous quote by Quatramain Quincy, but I will not go into details. So there's always this problem of the bombing and then the belonging senses. So the bombing of the Milan during the World War II, which is Turkey did not participate. The current Republic of Turkey, I'm talking, has not been participated. But Italians were participated big times, because there was this regime under Benito Mussolini back in the days, and he, as a fascist regime in Italy, during like the Hitler time in in Germany, that they were influenced each other very much, and then they were in the, let's say, close connections because of the ideas of the back of the regime. So we're talking about Milan a little bit. This is a magazine article from Life magazine. Also in Turkey, we have Life as well, but you guys probably seen the covers. So this was an article was written in 1944. So during the bombings, because the bombings were between 1943 and 45. So this is in between, let's say, state. So why they bombed Milano? Um, Milan, Italy's main economic and industrial center, and its second largest city. The biggest one is in Rome today by the population. The second one is Milan, and it was heavily bombed during the World War II. And they bombed mostly or almost the northern part of Italy, not the south, not in the middle. So this gives a reflection of, I hear a lot of sentences and comments when the tourists or you guys came, and then you think that, Milano doesn't seems like Italy. It's very different. Or Torino, it doesn't give the vibe that has been we're in Italy, but it's more like a European city, but you don't see Italian culture. It's not like Rome or Florence because it has been bombed. Approximately half, like 50%, 60% of Milano was bombed and then reconstructed in 1950s. So of course, when you ruin something, when it's gone, it's very hard to give the previous state back to the new owners, no? So they had to build Milano, more than half of it from zero. And if you guys are more interested in this topic, we can discuss more, but I'm skipping more quickly. So this is a photo that I absolutely adore. We don't know the source, but this is the Teatro alla Scala, which is the theater of La Scala. It's one of the biggest and most famous, let's say, theaters in the world that host the biggest events and the biggest celebrities, for opera or for ballet or for any kind of, let's say, today's luxurious art form. Um, so in 1776, so 200 years before, more or less 150 years before the bombing, Milan was without a theater, which was very dramatic for the barons for the nobles back in the days. And prompting back in the days, the Duke of the time commissioned the construction of a new building. So uh, they built a building for opera in the honor of the Duke because back in the days, like I said in the Venice example, it was kind of representation of the wealth and then the money. So they would like to represent themselves the best by showing off that they have the best theater in the world. So in the early hours of August in 1943, Teatro alla Scala was completely bombed because, like I said, even Hitler, there's so much bad things to say about him, but then he was an art lover and art collector, that he understood the value of art and how to collect. He was a very big collector. He had this huge, let's say, collection of paintings and buildings and any kind of, let's say, art form. So according to the mentality, if they would like to destroy or ruin a heritage in a city or in a country, in the memories, the first thing they have to attack is art. It's very long shot in our heads because we protect different values in today's world, in nowadays. But then, according to Europeans, let's say European state of mind, that if you ruin art, if you ruin paintings, if you ruin architecture, then you delete, you erase our memory, our history. So it was bombed, and then immediately after the bombing, they were overwhelmed. And then the first thing they did was to tidy up the bombing, the aftermath of the bombing, and then they rebuilt within a year, even a few months, not even a year, maybe less than a year. Uh, and then they reopened with a big concert during the time when there was still war. So they didn't stop the war; they were still on the war, but then they kept on going with the opera. So into this is how today you can see the opera house. This is where the big stage is, and this is the main seatings, and these are the, let's say, noble boxes. Um, and of course you don't see, but this is the main central box. So it used to be like this, a very, let's say, architecturally speaking, very classical, let's say, style facade, and then converted into by Italian architect Mario Botta in between 2000 and 2004, that they would like to create a new adjunct because now it's not as big or as welcomed as anymore. The city needs something bigger, something larger. So you can see that they added this building, this form, and then this, let's say, cubic building in the back of an original facade to enlarge the function and the facilitate. And why did they do this? They selected with a completely modernist approach, or postmodern in some senses. And this is a very like neoclassical architectural approach, even though they believe that in Mario Botta's, let's say, approaches, this is my own comments as how I would read this building, is that by adding with a completely different architectural style in that sense, will highlight even more of the cultural importance and then the heritage of what the old traditional, let's say, historical building looks like, traditional opera building. So that's why he chose a very different architectural language. So, again, I have this problem with the pictures. I'm very sorry, guys. I don't know why this is happening, but so this is another one of the most important churches in Milan. It's not, of course, the Duomo, as you all know, the white one with the spikes, but this is again one of the most important ones. Was completely ruined in the war. This is the church called Santa Maria delle Grazie, which is very famously known as, you probably know, the Last Supper of the Jesus. Um, so you know that the Jesus is having dinner one day before his death with the 13 apostles, and then the Judas is looking at him and then planning on how to kill him. So this is a fresco. Fresco means a wall painting. Um, it's a universal term coming from in Italian, of course, from Latin, but even Turkish, when you describe this kind of, let's say, artwork, you describe as fresco. You don't do paintings. This is a wall painting. And even in the war, their first concern, their first, let's say, approach was to collect what is most valuable. And in that sense, this war, luckily, we're lucky enough, even though the whole, let's say, um, as the alliances were striking, all the art forms were completely destroyed. The Last Supper were protected, and then it has been carried out safely to the next generations. So that leads us to the next step, which is terrorism and vandalism. Environmental activists are often involved in such activities. There's a lot to say, but then I don't want to spend so much time on describing this issue that you all probably know and saw. This is La Scala, the theater building that you just saw. This is another activist, or I don't know what was the debate back in the days, but in 2023, so 2 years ago, more or less, a fountain in Rome that they're protecting an environmental issue, which is very nice in their heads, but then the way of their acting is harmful and it's very debatable. So even though in the back I support what they think of, but then it's completely wrong approach on how to act on it. And they're, of course, disturbing, harmful of the historical monumental, let's say, heritage, the culture, which is unacceptable in every senses. So the last point is neglect and is neglect. Let's put it that way, very simply. So it's very funny, but when I was searching for neglect, I'm sure there are many examples. But in Italy, I couldn't find a good reference point because, as you can see, after all of this speech, of all of this debate, even when you look at the UNESCO Heritage Site list, they have 58, which is the most heritage listed in the UNESCO Heritage Site in the world, that it's not easy to find neglect. So this is a picture from 1960s, the very famous Italian, let's say, actor called Paolo Di Paolo. So when you see Italy, why are they so advanced? So we took step by step. We first understand what heritage was, and then we understand how to protect and why to protect. And after we understand, but what are the other points of being harmful to the heritage? What are the causes, the main problems, the main issues that we're facing with in order to in order to destroy it? And then the final step will be is to why Italy is so advanced and how we can learn from them. So in the ancient Roman times, that they believed that artwork, even it belonged to a private property, a private person, it doesn't matter, was part of the collective heritage of all the citizens. Um, so if you own a painting, if you own an artwork, that means that you have this responsibility to protect it in order to preserve the whole countries, the whole citizens' cultural heritage. So, for example, the statues adorning the facade of the privately owned building held a common value and could be seen as a public space to accessible all citizens. So they're placing specifically all of these, let's say, I mean, maybe here can see even better. So all of these statues are not replaced or being put inside of their own private properties, but then they're being placed on the front facade. So everybody, every citizen who's walking there to get a coffee in the morning can see and preserve the statue itself. Um, I mean, there's so much to say, so much to talk, but I will be skipping very much in order to come to a conclusion, come to an end. Like I said, if you guys would like to have the debate, maybe in Turkish as well, we can have a debate in the very end. Um, so this is, I mean, very rapidly to conclude, this is a street that is called Via Fate Bene Fratelli, which is one of the main hospitals. I mean, located. This is the main church. Sorry, in Milano. That even today in 2024, the city structure, the needs, the functions, the way of living, let's say, change completely, drastically of how it's in the, let's say, historical times. When you read of the architectural facts and then the way of creating the city itself, it's exactly the same. So, of course, everything changed when you look at the picture, but then the main idea and then the main approach of creating the city is very similar. So, as architects, we have this responsibility to protect, preserve, and then kind of give, maybe in different forms and different functions, but then give the same, let's say, ideas, statues, in order to protect the historical heritage in our hands to the next generations. So another picture. This is Oxford in 1810, and this is Oxford in 2015. Not even a single tile has been changed in the buildings. But then when you see the images of Istanbul, or even in the historical, let's say, movies or books or descriptions, we see this is the same place where they shot, that it has been completely transformed and translated, but it's very unfortunate that today we don't get to see or experience any of these because we destroyed it and we replaced with something else. So I would like to take a step back. Of course, the advancement of architecture and then the advancement of the technologies should be adapted on how we build things, how we let's say it makes our lives easier, but we cannot destroy everything and then rebuild from zero. That makes everything very artificial and very artifact. So I would like you to go take a step back. Every little drawing or every little project that we're building as architects, we have the responsibility to our nation, to our culture, to our society. So final images. You guys probably seen this, no? It's a very famous in 2019. It was extremely famous. A random guy taped a banana on a frame, but it was not a random guy. It was this artist called Maurizio Cattelan, which is a very, very famous Italian, let's say, artist. So we have finished the lecture. But there are a few book suggestions that if you are interested in this lecture, or if you're interested in the topic, that none of them are talking about Italy, but I really highly recommend as an architect and as, how to say, as a student that in your architectural studies in the path that you should study or read. This is a book, The Story of Art by Ernst Gombrich, one of the most influential art, let's say, historians and writers in the world. The first published in 1950. So, of course, since it's published in 1950, it's not, how to say, it's not recent. And the book doesn't cover the contemporary art, but then you can read very briefly, very synthetically, and very, let's say, historically correct about the historical artworks that has been included in the book. And the second one is on collective memory, heritage and sociology series by Maurice Halwash. This is again a very incredible book because the Maurice Holbush, he kind of introduced on how do we use our mental images of the present to reconstruct our past. So he's always talking about the address this question for the first time, actually, not always, but he's the first one of the first writers ever in the sociology aspect on collective memory. What is a collective memory, and how do we represent and reconstruct this memory of our past in their minds? So the next one is the ruralism, the Future of Villages and Small Towns in an Urbanizing World by Vanessa Miriam Carlo. So, in this book, that Carlo is kind of taking into account of in an urbanizing world as of today that all the cities are becoming very big, very large, and even the small cities, small hamlets, or small, let's say, towns before that are becoming big cities now. Um, she considered that to measure all of the things, not just the parameters of the buildings or the number of populations, but also the other little small parameters that we don't usually take into account. So the attention of architects, which is us in this sense, and the planners has been almost entirely focused on the city for many, many years, while rural places are often unfairly associated with economic decline, stagnation, and resignation. So she was taking into account of these little rural points. I will not talk, of course, very detailedly of each the book, but just to give you a brief introduction of what is what. The next one, I'm 100% sure you all read it. You must. This was the first ever book that the teachers were suggesting when you start architectural school. If not, go now, buy it, read it. I'm not sure if we can find the Turkish versions of all the books, but I mean, you're studying English, so I'm pretty sure it's not a problem. So this is a book were written in 1960s again by Kevin Lynch, one of the biggest urban theorists. It's called Image of the City. And this is his, let's say, end final result of his 5 year research. So this book was not built to express his work completely of over the years or his thoughts, but it was a work has been converted in the book that has been very helpful for everyone. And in this book, he kind of observes on how to take information of the city and use it to make mental maps. So again, the topic is very similar, very simple. He is observes the city, takes the information, and then creates the mental maps and how the city is. The next one, this is by Rem Koolhaas, OMA, the Architectural Office. I'm again sure that you must heard of it. I'm talking about very, let's say, famous examples today, but then I would like to give a little recap of how, like, as architects, what kind of books that we should have read already. So this is a book called Delirious New York, a retroactive manifesto for Manhattan. Again, it's a very old, I mean, it's not recent, it's 1978 by very, very, very famous Rem Koolhaas, that he takes New York as an arena, as a, let's say, test case study, as a test, in order to experience the Western civilization through the simultaneous human density invasions, and the technologies, and then in this case, the Manhattan, a completely new, let's say, empty land. We used to be an empty islands of where the was the word the locals, I forgot the words, the indigenous were living. Um, and has been converted completely into this very fancy, posh, expensive place, one of the most expensive places in the world. It's a book of culture and congestion, so it's very, let's say, linked. And the next one is Kenneth Frampton, Studies in Tectonic Culture. It's definitely an influence for future debate on evolving modern architecture, because modern era, is today's, we're in a contemporary era, we're not in a modern era. So he's talking about the modern age, where after 50s, 60s, and is nothing less than rethinking, of course, the entire modern architecture tradition and how to reflect those times in the current states. And final, this is not a book. This is a conference, a talk, a speech, an architectural speech by Winnie Maas, which is a very famous Dutch architect. They have this architectural, let's say, office, very, very famous. I'm sure you know their work. It's called MBRDV. Um, and in the AA School of Architectural Talk, I think which he used to be a chair in AA, and he's also teaching in Delft, very famous university in Netherlands. And also he used to be 1 year editor of Casabella, I think 2021 or 22, if I'm not mistaken. So very important, influential architects. But this talk is a fantastic talk. I would not say any words. He's talking about his works, but the way of he's explaining of how the process of being protecting and then learning from the context from the site reflects into the architectural project is very, let's say, influential, very important. So this is it. This is the whole lecture. We have done it. We've been talking for 1.5 hours, maybe more. So thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'm here to answer.
Thank you very much, Ekin.